As I understand it, category A is the worst category, and he was not only in possession of these but distributing them. This guy was distributing the worst form of child pornography, and he's been given a suspended sentence. He's not going to jail. What is wrong with our system? I mean, I'm going to say it. These people should be hanged. Forget suspended sentences, forget prison sentences. They should have the millstone. It's biblical. This is absolutely disgusting that in Britain, in the 21st century, people can get away with paedophilia and suffer no consequences whatsoever. And actually, they don't really care about justice. They don't care about taking down people who have done wrong. What they care about is taking down the opposition. And that's what you were at that point. You made yourself the opposition to them, which is why they did everything they could. And eventually, it was Carol Vorderman that had the last kill, as it were, because she put that petition out to get Lawrence Fox fired, and then obviously the domino effect meant that you and I both got fired in the end too. But this is what they do. Anyone who is an enemy, they will go for them. But people on their side, they will protect them, even if they are paedophiles. And so all these people need to publicly repent. They need to publicly apologise for supporting Huw Edwards and attacking your good self. And I don't think many of them will. But they are exposed now. The public have seen them for who and what they are.
A dark day for the British bashing corporation. What do you make of what's happened with Huw Edwards and how the BBC can ever regain our trust after this?
It's quite sad, really, especially given the fact that so many people came out to defend Huw Edwards. In the beginning, we saw a number of people who were attacking you, actually, but defending Huw Edwards. You were the one who was found not guilty of anything, and Huw Edwards is the one who's been found guilty of paedophilia, for goodness sake. It just goes to show that people have interesting loyalties. But why, Dan, is it always the BBC? This is the question we need to be asking. Why are there so many paedophiles working at the BBC? Why are their colleagues seemingly covering up for them? Why are they getting away with it for so long? Hopefully, if he is guilty of this, he'll be sent down for a long time, and the BBC will have to answer to some degree too. So it's not just Huw Edwards here that's at guilt. It's the British bashing corporation. The BBC hate us for some reason. They're constantly shoving agendas down our throats as if they're trying to change us. But at the same time, they don't hold themselves to the same standards.
No, indeed, because Calvin, they have had to admit this afternoon that they knew Huw Edwards had been arrested. Now, look, I'm going to be very clear on this. I'm big on the presumption of innocence, and I do believe it was right not to sack Huw Edwards until he was charged with a crime. But the problem they have, Calvin, is they were warned. And like with so many of their big stars, most notably Jimmy Savile, but there were so many others that I mentioned in my digest, they turned the other cheek because they didn't want to acknowledge what was really going on, given he was so famous and so important to them.
Yeah, they turned a blind eye. It is almost like if some people reach a certain degree of fame, that they are allowed to get away with whatever they want because the corporation benefits from having them there. There are other people still at the BBC who you and I could both name who are probably doing a lot of dirty, dodgy stuff that should be shamed and should be removed from their positions, but they're not. Because people around them cover up in order to let them get away with it because they give good ratings or they give a good image to the platform. It's disgusting. We need to move beyond that, beyond the idea that someone famous can break the law and actually get back to having good values and believing in our country that anyone who breaks the law, such as a law as disgusting as paedophilia, should be held to account. Who was he sending these WhatsApp messages to? That's what I want to know.
Well, actually, I do now know that, Calvin, because we have had developments since coming on air.
Oh.
So the man who shared the WhatsApp messages with Huw Edwards has also been found guilty. And it happened months ago, but we were not told. So this is a man called Alex Williams. He is 25 years old and he is from South Wales. He was the one that shared these images with Huw Edwards on WhatsApp, and he received a suspended prison sentence in March after pleading guilty to 7 offences. Now, that has only been confirmed by South Wales Police today, but he was charged and pleaded guilty to 7 offences of possessing Category A indecent images, possessing Category B indecent images, possessing Category C indecent images, and distributing Category A, Category B, and Category C indecent images and possessing prohibited images of children. Now, he's not going to jail, Calvin.
As I understand it, Category A is the worst category, and he was not only in possession of these, but distributing them. This guy was distributing the worst form of child pornography, and he's been given a suspended sentence. He's not going to jail. What is wrong with our system? I'm going to say it. These people should be hanged. Forget suspended sentences, forget prison sentences. They should have the millstone. It's biblical. This is absolutely disgusting that in Britain, in the 21st century, people can get away with paedophilia and suffer no consequences whatsoever.
Because the thing is, Calvin, what people are forgetting is that these children as young as 7 were abused in order for Huw Edwards to consume these images.
There's clearly something wrong with Huw Edwards and this other chap. There's clearly something chemically and mentally wrong with them. But that doesn't take away from the fact that what they're doing is abhorrent and the gravest evil of harming young children, harming innocent people. These children will be traumatized for the rest of their lives. But the people who've done it are getting away with it, which tells you that you can do whatever you like in this country. You can do whatever you want to innocent children. At the moment, it seems you can stab them, you can sexually abuse them and suffer no consequences whatsoever. We need to get back to law and order. We need to get back to protecting the vulnerable, protecting the innocent, and those who break those laws should suffer severe consequences for them.
The thing is, Calvin, though, when it comes to the BBC, how can this happen time and time again? I mean, do you remember when this all emerged last year? Lee Anderson, then a Conservative MP, now a Reform UK MP, described the BBC as a safe haven for perverts. He was pilloried. But how can you deny it when you look at their rap sheet?
I mean, it seems it is. Look, if you're in a restaurant and someone got food poisoning at your restaurant, and then someone else a few months later got food poisoning, then someone else a few months later got food poisoning, your restaurant will get shut down. The BBC has harboured so many paedophiles. Why has the BBC not been properly investigated and or shut down? There's clearly something systemic going on there. We talk about institutional problems all the time, institutional racism, systemic racism. Well, the BBC seems to be systemically paedophilic. The BBC seems to be full of an institution that is paedophilic. There needs to be something taken care of there. They need to have an investigation and or close down the BBC. This cannot continue to happen.
I couldn't agree more. And you look at the other scandals, Calvin, as well. I mean, look, the sex scandals are clearly the worst because when innocent young children are having their lives destroyed because they happen to turn up to be on Top of the Pops, it's inexcusable. But look at the other scandals that would have shut down any other media organisation. The cover-up over the Panorama interview, where Martin Bashir produced fraudulent documents to trick Princess Diana into spilling her secrets, a decision that Diana's brother and son, Prince William, ultimately resulted in her death. Any other media organisation, Calvin, they would be shut down.
Well, the News of the World was shut down for far less than that, you're right. But the BBC has so much power and influence that, yes, this probably did lead to the death of the late Princess Diana, but also it could have led to the downfall of the monarchy. That's how much influence the BBC has. It is the official state broadcaster, pretty much. And so for them to be making these kind of fraudulent activities, something should happen. But again, this got swept under the carpet for so long. We didn't hear about this for decades, unfortunately. And so the people who were responsible are no longer there. But the whole institution seems to me to be corrupt.
Yeah. Well, it's protected by the establishment, isn't it, the BBC? Because it's like the NHS. We're constantly fed propaganda about how this is an organisation that represents the best of Britain. And we should be proud of it. No, I'm not proud of the BBC, Calvin. I'm disgusted by the BBC. I think the BBC represents the worst of Britain. And actually, folk are voting with their feet, Calvin. 500,000 people refused to pay the licence fee over the past year because we know it is criminal that folk are criminalised for refusing to pay the poll tax. And the problem is with the BBC licence fee, as you well know, if you watch any form of terrestrial TV, you have to pay it, even if you're not watching the BBC.
Well, this is actually a good thing that you've pointed out, that people can vote with their wallets. People can just turn off the BBC and refuse to pay the licence fee. Yes, at the moment, it is the case that if you watch any live television, then you have to pay the BBC for the privilege, even if you don't ever watch the BBC. And that's a scam. That's a con. Just refuse to pay the BBC licence fee. And people are afraid because people think there are some special vans that go around the country detecting people watching television. There aren't. Sometimes the BBC licence collectors do check by knocking on people's doors, but you don't have to give them entry to your house, so they have no right of entry. And so you can just refuse them and say, no, I'm not letting you in, and you actually refuse to pay the BBC licence fee. And I think more of us should. We should make a protest and say, we're going to no longer support paedophiles. We're going to no longer support fraudsters. We're going to no longer support people who want to change the English language. And we're going to no longer support an institution that is designed, it seems, around bringing down British values. We're going to say no.
Yeah, the problem is, Kelvin, they literally hound people. I mean, it's sick what they do. They hound elderly folk who can't afford their heating, but don't want to lose their lifeline to the world through their television set. I think it's just such a terrible organisation. And what's so infuriating, Calvin, is we've had a Conservative government for 14 years that fundamentally should have dealt with this organisation and refused to clip their wings at all. Then, Calvin, we move to the Hugh Edwards apologists, who you referred to a couple of minutes ago. This is equally extraordinary because, as you rightly point out, the likes of Emily Maitlis and Owen Jones were on a deranged witch hunt against me this time last year. Now, a lot of people, Calvin, at the time said that it was a direct response to what had happened with Hugh Edwards. The left were desperately looking for someone else to bring down. And in my case, unfortunately for them, they were trying to bring me down with complete lies and hysteria, which never added up. But you remember, Calvin, there was just the drumbeat over a number of weeks and a number of months, and then our mutual friend Lawrence Fox came on my show, as we all know, said that he wouldn't shag Ava Santina, and the rest is history, because it allowed the mainstream media to officially cancel us, and GB News and the Daily Mail gave into that. But the extraordinary thing, Calvin, is that at the time, the likes of Owen Jones and Emily Maitlis, without any evidence, without any due process, were cancelling me, were spreading total falsehoods about me. Yet these were the same two standing up for Hugh Edwards, saying that the Sun had acted appallingly by reporting the story of Hugh Edwards, because that's what unleashed all of this. Why, Calvin? Why? Why are they so hypocritical? And does it prove that finally these folk are just political operatives rather than journalists?
100%. These people are activists. This is why they don't care about the hypocrisy, because they protect their own. And actually, they don't really care about justice. They don't care about taking down people who have done wrong. What they care about is taking down the opposition. And that's what you were at that point. You made yourself the opposition to them, which is why they did everything they could. And eventually, it was Carol Vorderman that had the last kill, as it were, because she put that petition out to get Lawrence Fox fired, and then obviously the domino effect meant that you and I both got fired in the end too. But this is what they do. Anyone who is an enemy, they will go for them. But people on their side, they will protect them, even if they are paedophiles. And so all these people need to publicly repent. They need to publicly apologise for supporting Hugh Edwards and attacking your good self. And I don't think many of them will. But they are exposed now. The public have seen them for who and what they are.
It's interesting today, and I give him a small amount of credit for it, Calvin, is that we've had total radio silence from Emily Maitlis and John Sopel, who are tweeting about everything else other than the main story in Britain. But Owen Jones did issue some sort of mea culpa, but what really annoyed me, and you'll understand this, is he tried to blame homophobia. He tried to blame homophobia for the reason that people were having a go at him over this. And that disgusts me, Calvin, because the campaign that Owen Jones ran against me could be described as homophobic, but I don't go there. I don't play those identity politics. But it's so typical, isn't it, that even when he has committed an obvious journalistic mishap and a complete lack of any sort of moral foresight, immediately he has to blame homophobia.
Yes, because he has to be the victim in this situation. This is it. He couldn't just hold his hands up and say, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, actually, and I shouldn't have said what I said." He had to say, "Oh, well, it's because because I happen to be gay, and the people attacking me must be homophobic." Clearly, no, you're just wrong, Owen. Just hold your hands up and be wrong. There is a nobility in that. There's honor in that. But these people don't have any honor. They don't care. They don't care about right or wrong. They don't care about good and evil. They just care about themselves. And they're on their own team, backing their own guys. And you're right. You or I could have said the reason I was attacked is because I was black or mixed race. And you could have said the reason you were attacked is because you're homosexual. These things would not help the truth of the matter. That people attack us because they don't like us. They hate us. They hate what we stand for.
They were desperate to shut down something that we were creating, because what we were creating was an opposition within the mainstream media. And for so long, Calvin, they had had it all their own way. But why I think actually what they've done is massively backfiring on them is that actually having the freedom to have our own platforms without the control of, let's be honest, billionaires who fundamentally were pulling the strings, because that's what happens when you're part of a big media organisation, whether it's the Daily Mail, whether it's News UK, whether it's GB News. We don't have that now. So in fact, we can be even more honest. And yet you look at people like Emily Maitlis and John Sopel and Lewis Goodall, who claim to be champions of the little guy, and actually they're working for billionaires again at Global Radio. So they are having their strings pulled, but we are not. We are free, and we're free to tell the truth.
Again, they don't actually care about having their strings pulled because they believe in what their puppet masters are doing. They are political activists. They're not journalists. They're not interested in the truth, not interested in goodness, not even interested in the country, unless it's reshaping the country in their image. At the start of the show, you showed that Andrew Marr clip on Question Time, where he said, "Oh, this is a great Labour in power now. This is utopia. The country's going to be so wonderful. Money's going to be pouring in." And of course, we're not seeing that. We're seeing hostility all across the country. We're seeing riots, we're seeing machete fights, we're seeing poverty, pensioners losing everything. It's actually a dystopia, but they don't care because they got their way. They got their people in power. It's all about power. It's all about them.
Of course, because we saw yesterday, Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor in the UK, sits down with Emily Maitlis and John Sopel to admit that she lied to all of us during the election campaign, Calvin, and taxes are going up. And she chose those two propagandists to sit down with, which I think is very telling. Calvin, I want to speak to you on a human level about Hugh Edwards. So in court today, the KC representing him said that he expressed huge remorse for what he did. He said that this was a isolated incident. He didn't have other pictures that were illegal on his devices. And obviously this is a father. This is a husband. As a man of the cloth, how can someone like Hugh Edwards come back from this? Or is that impossible?
It is difficult. Of course I do believe in forgiveness. But that doesn't mean we are free of consequences. I think some crimes deserve severe consequences. I do think that the death penalty is warranted in a situation where children are harmed. And I do think, of course, he wasn't directly the one harming the child, so he perhaps should have different consequences, but there should be severe consequences. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to forgive. And that's the most difficult thing that any person can do, especially when you're talking about something as severe as this. But what that means is not harboring that bitterness and resentment, not harboring those harsh feelings in our own heart, because that can make our hearts harden, and we have to try and find a way to move past that. But the only way you can move past it is if there's contrition, and you're saying there is. I haven't seen that yet. I haven't seen that clear, but I saw him marching into court looking quite proud, actually, so that was weird. But there has to be contrition, and there has to be repentance, but there also has to be some form of penance, and this is the key part of the ingredient here, that the penance has to be serious.
I mean, look, he pled guilty. So I guess that's the start of taking responsibility. But clearly we have no sympathy for Huw Edwards after what he's done. What about his wife and 5 children, though, Calvin? Surely there should be sympathy and empathy for them.
I agree that we shouldn't hound them, and I'm hoping the media, as much as they're interested in Huw, will leave his family alone, especially his wife and his children. But to be honest, the onus is on him. He should have been the one looking out. He's the one who should be providing and protecting for his family. It's not our duty. So he's let them down massively, as well as letting everyone else down.
I'd argue he's let them down the most. You know, I've promised on this show to only talk to you about products that are actually life-changing. This one is a little bit more personal. But the fellas watching, you're going to completely get it. And I have to tell you, ladies, this is the best possible treat for your husband or boyfriend, because it really is a game changer. So you know us men want our grooming routine to be a one and done deal. Well, the days of using the same trimmer for your face and your privates are over, thanks to our friends at the brilliant Manscaped. They've come up with the ultimate package to keep your hairs trimmed from 12 to 6. Introducing the Beard and Balls bundle, featuring the Lawnmower 5.0 and the Beard Hedger. And despite what it sounds like, I'm not actually talking about a real lawnmower, like that sort of lawnmower. But this is a lawnmower that will trim your sensitive areas and actually get them as manicured as fresh cut grass. So this trimmer gets right the first time. It's gentle on the skin in all of the right places, and with 2 interchangeable skin-safe blade heads, you can choose between a precise trim or a smooth finish. And did I mention it's waterproof? You can trim in the shower and avoid making a mess everywhere. Perfect for those of us who appreciate efficiency. Next, I want to tell you about the Beard Hedge. Now, this is great whether you're going for a neat stubble. I think I've got a neat stubble look today, actually, or a full-on lumberjack. The trimmer has you covered because it has 20 length options, meaning you can achieve any style with a titanium-coated stainless steel T-blade. Just like the lawnmower, the Beard Hedger is also waterproof, so you can handle your beard grooming right in the sink or shower without worrying about water damage. And with up to 60 minutes of runtime and an LED charge indicator, you'll never be caught mid-trim with a dead battery. I love this product. I use it all the time. It will keep you very happy, and if you're looking for a treat for your boyfriend or husband, it will keep them very happy too. And the great news is, I've got a proper offer for you today. 20% off and free shipping. You just have to use the code Outspoken at manscaped.com. No more juggling multiple tools or dealing with subpar results, just efficient, effective grooming wherever you need it. I'm going to put the link in our YouTube description, but I'll repeat it again, manscaped.com. Use the code Outspoken when you check out. For the premium grooming experience, trust Manscaped. In 2 decades of shame for the British bashing corporation that has a sick history of protecting child sex fiends, including Jimmy Savile, this was still a jaw-dropping moment. BBC News cut away from breaking news from Israel to make a mortifying announcement of their own. Their top news host for decades, the man entrusted with delivering election results and announcing the death of the late Queen, had just made an astonishing guilty plea in a London courtroom. Huw Edwards had admitted to having sexual images of boys as young as 7 on his phone, and within half an hour was facing up to 10 years in prison. The cover-up corporation could no longer ignore the news.
Breaking news here on the BBC. Within the past few minutes, former BBC News presenter Huw Edwards has pleaded guilty at Westminster Magistrates Court to 3 counts of making indecent images of children. He arrived just under an hour ago. The offences took place between 2020 and 2022. They relate to 37 images that were shared on a WhatsApp chat, according to the Metropolitan Police. So in the past few minutes, the broadcaster, former BBC presenter Huw Edwards, has pleaded guilty at Westminster Magistrates Court to 3 counts of making indecent images of children.
Lee Anderson was pilloried last year for describing the BBC as, quote, a safe haven for perverts. But look at the rap sheet. Jonathan King, convicted of sexual offences between 1983 and 1987 against 5 boys aged 14 and 15. Original Radio 1 host Chris Denning, jailed for 18 months for gross indecency with a child, and in 1988 for 3 years for indecent assault on a 13-year-old boy and possession of indecent photographs. The thick of it actor Chris Langham, sentenced to 10 months in prison after being found guilty of downloading 15 child abuse images and videos. It's a Knockout presenter Stuart Hall, imprisoned for 30 months for 2 offences of indecent assault against a girl of 13 and another against a girl under 16. Rolf Harris, 5 years and 9 months after he was convicted of 12 charges of indecent assault against 4 girls, including one aged 7. Not to mention the 450 young people believed to be assaulted by the BBC's biggest star and most prolific pedo, Jimmy Savile. And when it came to Huw Edwards, they were warned but didn't act. In fact, we have learned in the last few minutes that the BBC knew Huw Edwards had been arrested but did not report the news. Another cover-up. Now, around the same time as the first Edwards allegations became public, a deranged left-wing witch hunt by people like Emily Maitlis and Owen Jones began against me. It was based on provable lies that I'm not going to give credence to here, and then exacerbated when Lawrence Fox said he wouldn't shag the female journalist Ava Santina on my former GB News show. The hysteria, you probably know, led to me losing my career in the MSM. But it was a political hit job, pure and simple, and I have since been entirely cleared after multiple spurious investigations. Now, isn't it funny that those same people trying to destroy me were the ones defending their establishment BFF Huw Edwards? Here was newsagent host Emily Maitlis.
The Sun has now rowed back from this implication of criminality in their coverage. They literally said on their newspaper that the top BBC star who paid child for sex pictures could be charged by cops and face years in prison. That is a Sun headline. If that doesn't suggest criminality,
they said could be.
Does?
They didn't say it would be. They were trying to put. I mean, of course, you're absolutely right. That is exactly the implication. That is exactly what they are pointing.
And they had
towards.
A denial from the young person, their so-called child, and they chose not to run the denial. Do you think there's a way back to the BBC for Huw?
Yes.
A career?
I do think that. I think in order for that to happen, lots of things have to go his way. But the country is not the Sun.
There's been radio silence from Emily Maitlis today. Here's more from her co-host John Sopel, who has been equally silent.
We now know there was no illegality. So what are you left with? Someone's private life has come under scrutiny, who is now unwell. I think it would be a crying shame if this is the last we see of Huw Edwards on television, when the allegations have turned out to be not that much.
He even tweeted, "This is an awful episode where there was no criminality but perhaps a complicated private life." That doesn't feel very private now. I hope that will give some cause to reflect. They really need to. I wish Huw Edwards well. The always wrong Lewis Goodall added, "The questions for the Sun just got bigger still." No wonder their podcast is now known as the Fake News Agents. Bit of former Sun editor David Yelland, who you saw there, also wrote on X, "I wish Huw Edwards well. The Sun inflicted terror on Huw despite no evidence of any criminal offence. this is no longer a BBC crisis, it is a crisis for the paper. Hugh's privacy must now be respected. Social media also needs speedy reform. But as usual, it was left to the reprehensible Owen Jones to launch the most strident attack. He wrote on X, "The Sun is a disgusting rag and they have to pay for what they've done to Huw Edwards. They tried to destroy someone's life with false claims of illegality involving a minor. We know now there was no criminality. And the Sun have driven a vulnerable man into medical care." Now, I always thought that was very ironic at the time, given that Owen Jones was the worst at amplifying all the lies around me, simply because I disagree with him politically. He didn't give a damn then about due process, but I will give him credit, at least today he has come clean, unlike Maitlis and Sopel. He's written on X, "Huw Edwards has pleaded guilty to illegal pictures of indecent pictures of children. In other words, pictures of child abuse. This is a vile crime. This is, as the Metropolitan Police say, completely separate from other claims, which is what I tweeted about last year. Given the deranged level of death threats and general homophobic bile I'm receiving, I realise there's probably little point stating the truth, but the truth matters. Huw Edwards has pleaded guilty to a serious crime today. This is separate from last year's allegations. And by the way, those objecting to the Sun's coverage last year were not comfortable with Huw Edwards' behaviour, but that's different from illegality or the Sun appointing itself the nation's moral arbiter. Huw Edwards is rightly disgraced by what he has admitted today." Now look, what we know is that the BBC is a disgrace to Britain. It should be immediately defunded because it is time that we start again. But just remember that when it came to both the Jimmy Savile scandal and the Huw Edwards scandal, the BBC and the wider political establishment and the MSM tried to look after their own despite obvious criminality. Thank God the days of the legacy media are numbered. But to react now, let me bring in today's superstar panel. And I'm delighted to be joined by the co-founder of the wonderful Together Declaration, Alan Miller, and the former Olympic rower, how appropriate this week, and Conservative Party candidate, not to mention top political commentator, Alex Story. Wow, great to have you both here. Huge day of news again. But Alex Story, we're learning quite a lot of new information right now from the BBC about Huw Edwards. What's most shocking is that they knew he'd been arrested last November, but decided not to report it?
Yeah, it seems to me. But the first thing I'd say is thanks, Dan, for taking me out of my holiday.
I'm sorry about that.
To report on scoundrels like the BBC and Sopel and Maitlis and all of that. But it seems to me to be par for the course for the BBC, just to brush under the carpet the things that it deems unpalatable and emphasize the things that it really backs. And we see that on the Huw Edwards story, but we see that on the riots, we see that at the Olympic Games, we see that all the time. We see that on the streets of London when Jews are being attacked in the streets, but when pro-Palestinians are given a free hand by the police. All of that is essentially what the BBC does constantly. So it's not a surprise to me. What it does do, though, is that it puts in questions everything that we've known from the BBC, or we've learned through the BBC across the ages. And that, for me, is the key question. What is it that we've learned from the BBC over the last decades that is not a lie?
I know. And they are very good at covering things up. I mean, Alan Miller, look, this is an interesting one because obviously there has to be due process when allegations are made. But clearly there's a real hypocrisy where a lot of folk decided to row in behind Huw Edwards because he's their man.
Yeah, I think the thing is that there does have to be due process, and people can get a bit trigger happy, but it is astonishing the extent to which some commentators have decided to rally round Huw Edwards and say, there's nothing there now. Let's get him back into the position. It was all kind of libelous. And yet we've had silence now. Well, it remains to be seen what comments are made subsequently now. But it does strike me that it's really concerning that both at the time and now, some people are saying the way to deal with these things is to limit and suffocate social media and other platforms. Somehow ordinary everyday people can't be trusted with the truth and honesty and reality, but the great and the good can. The great and the good, of course, who want to tell us we've got this climate catastrophe, and anyone that asks questions is a denier. That also with the BBC senior staff colluding with Sadiq Khan and telling all of their executives in BBC News and BBC South not to discuss ULEZ, a direct line to Sadiq Khan, as well as smearing ordinary citizens and calling them far-right and conspiracists when they were actually challenging ULEZ. All of this reflects a kind of stance and a particular outlook that isn't about the news, isn't about objective fact reporting, but it's much more about taking positions on all sorts of issues, on whether sex-based rights, whether that's to do with the environment. And of course, if you're the right type of person, one of our guys, then perhaps you're going to get far less scrutiny. It's going to look like it's a witch hunt, but then everyone else seems to be fair game. So it seems wholly inappropriate. And I think that the public are getting very fed up with it, Dan. I think the public is thinking to themselves, this is not an objective overview of things. This is very much a narrative-led situation where things are presented in a certain way. And that together, we've certainly been very acutely aware of this, and also to raise the attention of that with the public and to get them to actually comment, to write in, to off-comment to the BBC and actually try and have our voices heard. But as you say, that's another reason why MSM and the legacy media are feeling such a pinch. I mean, a lot of people have become very cynical about what they're seeing and hearing.
Well, indeed. And I guess, Alex, when you look at everything that Alan has just outlined, what the BBC now tries to set themselves as is the moral arbiter. And yet, where's their morality? They seem to be a completely corrupt company when it comes to the way they deal with scandals. So isn't it utterly ludicrous that we should ever listen to the BBC again when it's trying to preach to us about how to do things correctly, or when it's trying to hold other organisations to account? Haven't they lost all credibility now?
Yeah, I mean, it comes, I think, from a state of mind in which they believe that they are a superior caste. And that's, I think, an extremely important point to try and take on board. Once you start to see yourself as a superior caste, you give yourself privileges that you don't grant to others. That's where we are. The only reason why we are able to see this as clearly as we do today is because of social media, because we can interact outside of the channels of mainstream media. The reason why the establishment looks so fragile, and in my view, the reason why it's overreacting in the way that it's doing at the moment, is because they're in competition that they're losing. In the 1950s and 60s, it was much easier for the establishment to believe in its own superiority and to claim moral high grounds. It's no longer possible now, because we can see behind the curtain, and we can see that the Wizard of Oz is just an aging man playing a broken set of drums. I sincerely believe that they haven't moved on with it. They don't understand what's going on. They can't quite get their heads around the fact that they're losing credibility, and that the only way to regain it is to be trustworthy. And that means leaving the realm of propaganda and going back into the realm of news, of facts, and of trust. And building trust requires you to understand that the people who are listening to your news are intelligent enough to work out what is a lie and what is not, because of the technology that enables them to do so now.
I just want to read the statement that has just come in from the BBC, and then, Alan, I'll get you to react. So, clearly concerned about a cover-up, a BBC spokesperson has said, "The BBC is shocked to hear the details which have emerged in court today. There can be no place for such abhorrent behaviour, and our thoughts are with all those affected. The police have confirmed that the charges are not connected to the original complaint raised with the BBC in the summer of 2023. Nevertheless, in the interests of transparency, we think it is important to set out some points about events of the last year. In November 2023, while Mr. Edwards was suspended, the BBC, as his employer at the time, was made aware in confidence that he had been arrested on suspicion of serious offences and released on bail whilst the police continued their investigation. At the time, no charges had been brought against Mr. Edwards, and the BBC had also been made aware of significant risk to his health. Today, we have learnt the conclusion of the police process and the details as presented to the court. If at any point during the period Mr. Edwards was employed by the BBC, he had been charged, the BBC had determined it would act immediately to dismiss him. In the end, at the point of charge, he was no longer an employee of the BBC. During this period, in the usual way, the BBC has kept its corporate management of these issues separate from its independent editorial functions. We want to reiterate our shock at Mr. Edwards' actions, and our thoughts remain with all those affected. Now, Alan, I have two views on this, because firstly, I actually believe it's the right decision not to dismiss anyone until they are charged with a crime, because there has to be an assumption of innocence before proven guilty, and there has to be due process. But the problem you've got with the BBC here is that while it may not be related to this specific criminal case, they were warned about Huw Edwards' behaviour and they chose to take no action.
Yeah, I think the thing is, it is a judgment call, and I think that now you reflect on it and we can see that they were warned, there was some kind of recognition of it, and they chose a certain path. What I would say, if in good faith, I would say that, you know, we really should be innocent until proven guilty. A lot of people throw around a lot of slurs until it's been established and clear, either through admission or better at a court with a judge or with peers of yours. Until that happens, we don't know exactly what's happened unless we've witnessed it. My much bigger concern with all of this is this sense that we, the great unwashed, need to be lectured and dictated to and told how to behave, and constantly presented not just with nudges but with direct shoves. Quite often it was not just not the lockdowns but more broadly, and that, I think, for the public is a very big concern.
And Alex Story, the thing is that then you have the likes of Emily Maitlis, John Sopel, David Yelland, Lewis Goodall, Owen Jones, the legacy media, the establishment media, who actually wanted to use the Huw Edwards story to curtail freedom of the press and to control social media. So am I right in assuming that they believe that as long as it's one of their mates, as long as it's a member of the establishment, there shouldn't be true and honest reporting on what they get up to?
Yeah, I mean, that's the double standard. When we come across it, we have to ring the alarm bells. It's something deeply flawed in our society. They are granting themselves, as I said before, this ability to judge others, and they, as Alan said before, they're not really concerned about due process when it's one of theirs. When they're going on the attack, anything is doable, because maybe the best way to understand this is that they see themselves in a state of war against the past because they're progressives. So anybody who has claims to the past, who likes his culture and history, is a Neanderthal, a reactionary. He needs to be defeated. If he can't be coaxed into moving into the progressive future, then everything is on the table. And this is the brutality that we see with them constantly. There is never any fine detail. It's always black and white. On the white side, you have them who see themselves as superior to us, and they always launch and they always attach the vilest motives to what we might be saying or what we might have done in the past. But when it comes to them, there's a lèse-majesté style of reaction. They believe that they're far superior to us, therefore they should be treated differently. And this is so deeply seated, obviously in the UK, but not just in the UK. We see that in other countries in Europe as well and in the States. But that's the core, in my view, of the problem. They really believe that they're superior intellectually, culturally, socially, and everything else. We, as Alan said, are the great unwashed, and we don't deserve the time. For them, due process. For us, expediency.
Oh my goodness, you couldn't be more right. I mean, love that analysis. And in fact, fascinating that you use the phrase the great unwashed, because just last week, Mel Sykes, a major presenter at the BBC, revealed in a fascinating whistleblowing interview that BBC executives literally describe their audience, their license fee payers, their bosses as the great unwashed. So you couldn't be more spot on with that analysis. Alan Miller, can we ever trust anything the BBC says again? Because I'm sorry, I do not trust any of their reporters now, any of their journalists. As you rightly point out, they were propagandists for the government and for Big Pharma throughout the COVID crisis, and they got every single aspect of that story wrong. I think they were terrible when it came to reporting on Partygate, for example, which they tried to hype up in order to anti-democratically remove a prime minister from office. Can we ever trust the BBC's reporting again after all of this?
I think it's difficult to. I'm dubious about it. I firmly believe in the need for objectivity in reporting facts. Obviously, you can have opinion shows as well. I'm very concerned at the same time with the drive towards censorship, not just the Online Safety Act, but the Digital Services Act across Europe, and the constant attempt to limit and suffocate also the use of libel laws, which is often by the powerful to shut down others. And then using the courts to do that, when what we need is a full thrashing out of discussion. We saw it during Brexit. We've seen it consistently. We never seem to get an honest engagement with the public, a reflection of what people outside of London or Manchester might think. What about people in the coastal regions? What about across different parts of the country? It's infuriating, and it really reflects a kind of cavalier relationship to the truth. And when you have that situation, when you don't have standards and qualitative, investigative, rigorous approach that really lets you pursue the truth, regardless of, the implications, then that's very problematic. And I think that is the problem. Now, that does not mean we cannot have objective journalism, because I'm a firm believer that we must do. That it's not just that everything's relative and, you can have your truth, I have my truth. It is essential. There's some universal values and virtues and principles. There's common values that we need to subscribe to. And one of them is the truth, not many truths. But obviously, some of these things are complicated and sometimes people make mistakes. But the fact that you've got basically a propaganda organization at this point that is attempting to promote ideas that are very particular to the rest of the people who should know better is a real problem.
Yeah, indeed. And the person who was presenting those propaganda messages to us had child porn in his pocket, which is just a really horrifying thought. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please do subscribe if you want lots more clips and interviews like that. Plus, if you want to watch our totally uncensored after show, then visit www.outspoken.live.